of working together with CMS to clarify reimbursement for our pneumococcal conjugate vaccine for adults. So we have the approval, we have the recommendation, but we still don't have the third level still completely clarified. I think the second point for working together would also be to work together on another very important issue for vaccines. We know they can do a lot of good, but they have to be used equally among all people in the United States. And we know that there's Healthy People 2020 goals the CDC has put out for many of the vaccines they've recommended, whether it's influenza, meningococcal disease, pneumococcal disease, or others. And we know that we're not achieving those goals at all levels. All Americans are not achieving the same level of coverage and compliance as they should. And we think that's the area of vaccine disparities and equality is another area we'd like to have stronger partnerships across the public and the private sector to make sure that all Americans have access to these life-saving vaccines. I can say I'm very excited. I think you can tell I'm very excited to be here. I'm very invested in this initiative and in our vaccines work together. I think it's a privilege to be a part of such an illustrious panel and such a great discussion today. I do believe that vaccines have done a tremendous amount to change the world, and I think they can do a lot more if we continue to work together. I think we can make the world a healthier place, and it will be one vaccine, one person at a time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Clement Lewin with Novartis.
Thank you very much, Representative Elmer and Burgess, for the opportunity to share Novartis' perspective and be part of this distinguished panel. I'm particularly pleased to be in North Carolina, the site of our state-of-the-art cell-based influenza manufacturing facility. I won't go into it because it was mentioned by several people already, which was done in partnership with BARDA. One of the reasons we are cited here is the availability of a skilled workforce, the high quality of the local education institutions which were mentioned, and the willingness of state and local authorities to partner with Novartis. I'd like to focus on two areas. One, the ability to develop and manufacture vaccines routinely administered in the United States. And two, the capabilities to ensure our nation is prepared to rapidly respond to an emerging threat through vaccine production. The theme spanning both areas is something that I think every panelist has touched on, is the importance of strong, sustained public and private partnerships. Novartis and the other vaccine manufacturers possess unique capabilities critical to our national vaccine enterprise. A great example of the public-private partnership, I think, is the recent work between Novartis, CDC, and CBER to make a MenB vaccine available under expanded use IND to deal with outbreaks of disease at Princeton and UCSB. Over 15,000 people got the vaccine thanks to that partnership. The enterprise is fragile, and there are challenges that need to be addressed, and I think many of them have been touched on already today. And I think that the key things are we need to improve coverage rates in adults, we need to ensure adequate reimbursement for providers, and we need to maintain the attractiveness of the vaccine market for manufacturers to invest. Innovation, as somebody has been mentioned, is a particular concern because I like the idea where the low-hanging fruit is gone, we're at the high-hanging fruit. And I think we can address these challenges by making certain that CBER has adequate resources for the best possible regulatory science, that there's a consistent and transparent process for recommendations, and that we build on the immunization platforms in adults and pregnant women. I like to think of it as the baseball analogy or the movie analogy. If you build it, they will come. If we achieve high coverage rates for adults and pregnant women, more vaccines will be developed. Now, over the last decade, a new term has emerged, global health security. An outbreak anywhere is a threat everywhere. A key component of global health security is a rapid response to an emerging threat. Novartis has been at the forefront of these activities for the last 10 years with a focus on pandemic influenza. And so I think we've been working with Robin for a decade, if not more. Responding to emerging threats depends on the maintenance of manufacturing facilities and core competence in vaccines and vaccine production and development. Now, constant practice is required to improve capabilities. Manufacturing facilities can't be mothballed. Expertise can't be allowed to atrophy, and solutions must be improved. While Novartis is committed to supporting the preparedness efforts, funding is required, and the U.S. government is really our sole customer. Consistent, substantial, and transparent funding by the USG is critical to sustain the public-private partnership that provides an increasingly effective response capability that Robin discussed. So the vaccine industry, the vaccine enterprise, in which industry plays a crucial role, has been successful in both reducing the burden of disease and improving rapid response capabilities. We should not rest on our laurels, but ensure that an environment is in place to nurture the public-private partnership that's critical for continued success. And I think this panel is a great example of all of us sitting at the table and sharing ideas, and there's many common themes that are emerging. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Lewin. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Len Friedland with GlaxoSmithKline.
Representative Elmers, Representative Burgess, and distinguished panelists. Thank you, Representative Elmers, for the opportunity to participate in today's roundtable to discuss the vital topic of ways to accelerate the discovery, development, and delivery of innovative, life-saving vaccines for patients. I commend you on your efforts to address these issues and look forward to serving as a resource for this important initiative. On behalf of GSK, I would also be remiss if I didn't thank you, Representative Elmers, for visiting GSK's North America headquarters here this past July. My name is Dr. Leonard Friedland. I'm the Vice President of Scientific Affairs and Public Health for GSK, a global-led biopharmaceutical company. An industry leader, GSK develops a broad range of innovative products in pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and consumer healthcare. GSK currently employs 17,000 people in the United States, of which 4,000 employees are right here in the state of North Carolina and nearly 1,000 in your district. Representative Elmers, so thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to highlight to the committee and participants several areas I believe Congress should consider in order to advance innovation, improve patient care, and position the United States as a world leader in vaccines. Core to these recommendations is the concept of enhanced collaboration between public health and private stakeholders. These include support funding for basic biomedical vaccine research and leveraging the complementary role of the biopharmaceutical industry in bringing innovative treatments to patients. Provision of adequate National Institute of Health funding is critical to sustain a sustained delivery of basic biomedical research. Public-private partnerships are made possible by the availability of sufficient federal funding of programs such as the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority's Strategic Reserve Fund and the Vaccine Research Center at the NIH. The Ebola vaccine development program currently underway with GSK's investigational Ebola vaccine is one example of the power of public-private partnership to deliver innovation. GSK is working with an international consortium and has advanced a series of clinical trials now that are underway that could lead to data that can enable the World Health Organization to make an informed decision on patient care. It's a real-life example of how coordinated action among committed stakeholders from multiple sectors can accelerate a development process that normally would take many, many years. GSK's collaboration with Barter and Texas A&M University represents another example of a successful public-private partnership in which each partner brings specific core competencies to the table and resources to bear in the effort to prepare our country for a pandemic flu event. Through the recent reauthorization of the Pandemic All Hazards Preparedness Reauthorization Act, Congress authorized funding for public health and medical preparedness through 2018 for procuring medical countermeasures. It's more critical than ever to fully fund PAPRA-authorized programs to ensure the robust public health infrastructure necessary to address growing biosecurity threats. Congress should ensure research, development, and delivery of vaccines that meet U.S. public health needs through federal agency engagement. GSK is committed to researching, developing, and delivering vaccines that meet U.S. public health needs. Open, transparent, and regular communication with federal agencies is critical to achieve this goal. Engagement not only with the FDA, but also with CDC, CMS, private payers and healthcare professionals and patients during the design and implementation of development strategy is absolutely critical. Engagement with key federal agencies throughout the product development process to better understand the U.S. public health perspective as it relates to public health needs, to epidemiology, to implementation considerations and product profile can inform R&D planning. And with this insight, manufacturers can more confidently pursue vaccine targets with product profiles that are expected to be of value to stakeholders and meet public health needs in the United States. Additionally, it's important to understand the impact of reimbursement on innovation and ultimately patient access to vaccines. Healthcare financing and reimbursement models shape the market, which in turn informs public-private sector decisions on R&D investment. The federal government, as mentioned, is the largest payer for vaccines. As such, we look forward to engaging with CDC, CMS, Congress, and other relevant stakeholders on important reimbursement issues, including appropriate coverage of recommended adult immunizations, and encourage the government to assess the opportunities and barriers to innovation and access presented by existing and future reimbursement models. Finally, modernization of vaccine clinical trial designs and adaptive pathways for regulatory approval provides another opportunity for enhanced collaboration between public and private sectors. Advances in clinical design methodology and regulatory thinking present opportunities to increase the quality of our clinical programs, optimize decision-making, and reshape the economics of development. The FDA breakthrough designation and the increased scope of the accelerated approval pathway are promising developments on the regulatory front. Thank you for the opportunity to share GSK's perspective on enabling conditions to advance vaccine innovation, disease prevention, and public health preparedness in the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. I'd like to introduce now Ms. Marian Wentworth with Merck & Company Incorporated.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Elmers and Dr. Burgess, and members of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee as well for supporting 21st century cures, I think, and creating a focus on vaccines in particular. I think a discussion around the development, delivery, and discovery of vaccines is an incredible, it should be a cornerstone really of your effort to really find new innovations to solve some of our greatest healthcare problems. And I would say that, you know, the most recent events that are covering the news all over the place just put in high relief the importance of continuing to find ways to foster innovations because there are always new threats to public health. Merck has a very long history in vaccines. It's over 100 years, and of which we're very proud. And I think our recent history of continues to demonstrate our ability to discover, develop, and deliver new innovations into the public health community. But they're not without some challenges in terms of delivery, and I don't want to go across too many of the areas that we've covered before because I realize that the open discussion is going to be extremely exciting. However, there are a couple of things that I do want to kind of highlight. As you're aware, we have vaccines for pediatrics, for adolescents, for adults, and as I said, I could probably cover all issues around all of them in over a couple of hours. But I do want to focus for a few minutes on adult vaccination as a particularly interesting and important case study in the infrastructural nuances that are required to improve in order to really get delivery where we want it to go, where we think that it needs to be. We discover and develop these innovations, but they do nothing if they don't actually get to the people who need them the most. And along those lines, one of the things we know in working with the CDC's 2020 initiative is that not only, as Susan Silverman pointed out, is adult vaccination inadequate, but it's also stagnated over the last 5 to 10 years. It's actually not moving. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about why that is and what potential initiatives we could talk about together. And so those are a couple of the policy initiatives that I wanted to share with this panel this afternoon. One of the first things that's actually pretty important to us is that we increase the number of sites and decrease the cost and difficulty of accessing vaccination for adults. And that means including pharmacies and federally qualified healthcare centers in the ability to vaccinate adults. These are organizations that have professionals who are trained, who are state approved, but they are not at this point incorporated routinely into network providers of insurance plans. And so they don't actually necessarily secure reimbursement. It means that it's actually a challenge for an individual to go find out where they can get a vaccine, if not from a primary care provider, and we know primary care providers are dwindling in terms of numbers. it's a challenge for them to find a place to go, and we think that leads to a failure to have vaccination opportunities. Additionally to that, we actually think that it's pretty important to clean up some of the places. We've committed in this country to first dollar coverage for most vaccines, but there are a few places where that hasn't been ironed out yet, and we'd like to close those gaps as well. And then finally, it probably isn't as exciting to talk about, but these are the details that actually matter in terms of getting it done. Reimbursement and payment is complicated. And our providers and our consumers don't necessarily know how to secure it. And so we think there is some work to do to streamline that, but also in the near term to improve education around that. And that particularly matters for vaccines because our providers actually pay for those vaccines, they buy them from manufacturers first, and then they don't secure reimbursement until after they've administered the vaccine. And that time delay and that complexity means that they have to deal not only with the confusion about whether it's reimbursed, but also what it does to the economics of their practice. And we think that's a seriously and important consideration as well. So I'll stop right there for now. Thank you very much for inviting us. This is really an important discussion and an important time to have this discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Wentworth. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Oren Cohen with Quintiles.
Thank you very much, Representative Elmers, Representative Burgess, and fellow panelists. Thank you all for your leadership in this area that's so vital to public health. My name is Dr. Oren Cohen. I'm Global Head of Early Clinical Development at Quintiles. Headquarters just 2 exits down on Interstate 40. You may have passed it, came from the airport. We're the world's largest biopharmaceutical services provider. We have 30,000 employees working in 100 countries, and we have about 2,800 here in North Carolina. I know you'll agree with me that North Carolina is a wonderful place for a global headquarters, and we draw on all those fantastic resources that many panelists have alluded to. Our company's worked on the development and or commercialization of essentially all of the top-selling vaccines and drugs on the market. Over the past 5 years, our vaccine experience includes more than 110 studies targeting pandemic and seasonal influenza, malaria, HIV, HPV, and many other diseases of global public health concern. I wanted to briefly share some key recommendations from our perspective as an advisor and facilitator of vaccine trials globally. I'll highlight 3 areas where I think there's a potential to make a difference in our shared goal of bringing new vaccines to people who need them sooner. And I might just refer I think panelists have a copy of this at their tables, and I might just refer to it for convenience. Okay. Well, maybe not.
Props.
There we go. So the first area is process, and I think it's critical to think about reducing inefficiencies in the conduct of clinical trials. Institutional review board, the IRB review process has been brought up many times in the cures conversation and in the clinical trials process. You can see that here under number 2, the site startup process. One practical means of efficiency here is to include a commitment to timely IRB review as a condition for conducting trials for vaccines and other compounds with breakthrough or other expedited designations, as has already been discussed today. Now, right here under number 4, the execution and data collection for vaccine trials. Another efficiency would be to use common data standards and electronic source data capture in federally supported vaccine trials. Variability in how patient visit data is represented and collected, along with inefficiencies of transcription and verification of data, could be minimized with this approach. For serious and life-threatening diseases, we recommend further use and creation of alternative development pathways. This has also been recommended by a number of other panelists. FDA could grant accelerated conditional approval of new vaccines based on trials in smaller populations meeting rigorous safety and short-term efficacy standards. followed by robust post-marketing studies to verify safety and efficacy over time. And this would fall under the regulatory review process up here on the diagram. The final area is preparedness. In addition to broad public health capabilities, this includes spurring discovery and implementation of next-generation technologies and approaches to address new threats. We could foster these developments by encouraging the sharing of data from failed vaccine programs, sharing pre-competitive data, pursuing regulatory science initiatives that anticipate next-generation technologies in the vaccine domain. That really helps basic research, which, as we've heard, critically important to the process, as well as the planning and design of clinical trials themselves. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of today's roundtable. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. And last but not least, our 15th panelist, Mr. Malcolm Thomas with Arbovax Incorporated.
Representative Elmers and Representative Burgess, thank you very much for inviting me here in this distinguished panel. Arbovax, probably not a household name like maybe Merck or GSK, so I'll say a little bit about the company. We've been around in Raleigh since 2007. We were actually formed to commercialize a very interesting technology that came out of North Carolina State that can be used to make vaccines against insect-borne viral diseases. It's quite an elegant method of interrupting the insect mammalian host range of the virus. So we started out with dengue fever, and we've been pushing forward to human clinical trials with a dengue fever vaccine. Just to illustrate the power of the media, we had played around with chikungunya for a while. Nobody's ever heard of that. Up until about 6 months ago, and I think we have probably around 1,200 cases in the US now. Last year it was dengue fever that you were starting to see in the US. Now it's chikungunya. Unfortunately, well, actually that was good for us because it allowed our investors to pony up a bit more money to move chikungunya to a clinical stage. Then Ebola came along and pushed chikungunya off the media list. So, but we continue to move forward, and I have a whole different slew of concerns than some of the more established companies. Of course, our main concern is keeping the company afloat. We are an equity-funded company. Vaccines are not cheap. I think we've done, the past 5 years, we've raised probably slightly less than $5 million, so we've done pretty well. We're now moving into a clinical phase, which is much, much larger funds that we're looking for. We're looking for not only equity funding, but grant funding. I would say we've received incredible help from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. They've been with us since day one, actually since day -1, and they've done a wonderful job at moving us forward. We've also had tremendous help from Walter Reed, Rare, the Institute. They've been looking at dengue for about 30 years, and they've been very, very supportive for us. And as I said earlier, to step outside of North Carolina, we've just been through our FDA review for both dengue and chikungunya, and I was staggered at how supportive and collaborative the FDA were and how quickly they moved. We're a biotech company, and we tend to move quickly. We expect everything to happen tomorrow, and I was so impressed with the way things went with the FDA and how collaborative it was when we were kind of expecting some adversarial approach with them. So my understanding of the FDA process has been really enhanced by that. So apart from all the help we've got from, say, the Biotech Center, North Carolina is a very good environment for a small startup company. The accessibility of trained and skilled staff in an area which is fairly specialized with molecular biologists has been very, very much helped us move forward. So that's, having come from the Bay Area, this was a real eye-opener, how we were able to move forward quickly and with a lot less money than we probably would have done in some other states. So that's where we are today, and we continue to move forward, and we continue to get help from some of the government agencies. Christina Cassetti at NIH has been very, very helpful to us. I mentioned those particular people who've been helpful to us. So, I look forward to the discussion. I'm sure it'll be an interesting one.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. And since you were the last to be introduced, I would like to start with a question for you. You did describe two of the areas that you are working on. Are there others that you are working on? And what, from your perspective, being part of a smaller entity, what are some of the differences that you feel that you're able to work through, and what innovations and maybe new techniques have you been able to apply in your organization?
Well, you say what targets we can work on. We have two. We originally had one. We have two now. There are actually more than 200 insect-borne viral diseases that cause problems in humans. Probably the best known around here is West Nile, and we have a West Nile target. Last year was one of the worst West Nile outbreaks in this area. This year it seems to be a bit quiet. I don't know, maybe chikungunya is out-competed the mosquitoes for that, but so we have enough targets to take us through. It's money and time, of course, that is. I would say, being a small company, we move very quickly. Chikungunya, and I won't go into a long technical explanation, but chikungunya took us about a month to make a vaccine target of chikungunya. West Nile, which actually has a good alignment with dengue fever, took us about a month to make a West Nile candidate. If we look at some of the other ones that are related to chikungunya, like equine encephalitis and Venezuelan encephalitis, a lot of those, again, we can move very rapidly on those. So none of them are kind of pandemics, but they could be. And you always see small outbreaks of these. And I know a lot of the equine encephalitis are now making on the bioterrorism watch list. So that's helpful to a company like ours. It helps to be in areas that are maybe get media coverage, and because our whole rationale that we're alive is because people give us money because they see there's a reason for what we're doing. And believe me, 5 years ago it was very difficult to get people interested in dengue fever. Now it's actually a crowded area. So that was the first part, and I must admit I missed the second part.
I was just, there again, I was just curious if, because you were a smaller entity, if you were able to, or incorporating new advancements and innovations.
I think the basic technology is innovative. We can grow it very rapidly and very cheaply in insect cells, and the insect cells are actually well understood by the FDA as being a potential vaccine growth media. I think influenza as well would certainly transition to insect cells because it allows you to react much more rapidly than the egg system. So that's some of our basic innovative concept is that it can be grown very rapidly, very cheaply, and all of these potential insect-borne arboviruses can be grown cheaply and rapidly in insect cells. So as a company, we could move very quickly into whatever the next target is. And 2 years ago, you would never ever have convinced me chikungunya was going to be so popular. Who knows what it'll be next year? Maybe West Nile will come back. Maybe one of the equine encephalitis, or any of the 200, which you don't want me to go through them, but could pop up. It just seems it's globalization of diseases. And, Ebola got a lot of media coverage, but thank heavens it's not insect-borne. If it were, I think we'd be in a lot more trouble. We really have to be motivated to catch Ebola. Whereas insect-borne viral disease is kind of a passive thing. You get bitten by mosquitoes all the time, and so that's really the landscape of those diseases.
Thank you, and I feel like I have been the one speaking for a while, so I'm going to refer to Dr. Burgess for some questions, and then I do have some subsequent questions as well.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Thomas, as a part of the country that was the recipient of the West Nile, certainly appreciate your efforts. But Dr. Friedland, we talked, I mean, Mr. Thomas has outlined a relatively straightforward strategy, a month of vaccine development, but your company's development of the Ebola vaccine has been more lengthy, has it not?
Well, thank you, Congressman. You know, in the case of Ebola, we're dealing with a fast-moving and rapidly evolving situation, and GSK's response has been, reflects the fast-moving, rapid pace that we're dealing with. So there's just tremendous, great unmet need and high expectations from the global health community with regarding Ebola. And when we look at this, it's both innovative and challenging for GSK. We are executing a parallel development program along with parallel manufacturing and also parallel unknown regulatory pathways as well. And we're doing this in partnership, public-private partnership, with a wide consortium of partners, the NIH, and thank you, Dr. Heilman, with partners in the United Kingdom, with the World Health Organization, and fortunately, we've started clinical trials. Clinical trials started here in the United States on September 2nd, started in the United Kingdom on the 17th of September. Studies are about underway to start in Switzerland, and by the end of the year, we'll have one, if not two studies starting in West Africa. Then we're also planning for our phase 2 program, leading towards hopefully registration, and that will start in 2015. But more importantly, we expect initial data to become available by the end of the year, at which time GSK, working with our partners in the WHO, can look to make informed decisions on how the initial response can be instituted for possibly high-risk individuals. Then we need to look for a process for registration, and along with that, we need to have scaled-up manufacturing to get a vaccine available for the public for potential stockpiling purposes. And this can only be done with continued public-private partnerships and funding. And that's going to be absolutely critical to make sure that this vaccine can be available should the data support that. So it's been challenging and innovative and fast-moving, and it's a fantastic example, though, of the power, as I said earlier, of how the public and private can work together to look to solve problems in advanced science faster than we possibly would do under normal circumstances.
And I agree with you, it is faster than under normal circumstances, but isn't there a case to be made for it to be even faster than what you outlined? As we go through the phase 1 trials, there is, the need exists, and I recognize the difficulty with trying to do a randomized clinical trial while there's an epidemic raging half the world away. But at the same time, that's the reality with which we are faced. So is there any possibility that there might be an expectation of moving even more rapidly than what you have outlined?
The situation is fast-moving, rapidly evolving, and GSK's response, working with our partners, absolutely reflects this, appropriately so. This is being done in partnership. There are ethical issues as well to be discussed, regulatory issues as well. And all partners are working round the clock on this incredibly important situation, but it needs to be done in a way that data can be generated so that informed decisions can be made, so that patient safety is protected. And so we have to respect the scientific process, but also look for innovative, new ways of working, and that's exactly what is happening here. And let's just hope that the data that becomes available can allow the scientific community to make an informed decision that can begin to address this really important scientific and public health issue.
Let me just ask you a question on the concept of, you talked about the scalability and the stockpiling of vaccine, no pun intended, but there's kind of a chicken and egg phenomenon here. You've got to know that there's a market for it before you scale up, and at the same time, you're still in the process of deciding whether this is something useful that you can provide to people. So when your marketplace is as yet undefined, does that make the scalability of your product more difficult?
I think that's a good way to begin some discussion. Perhaps other panelists might want to speak to this as well.